exploring the power, the potential, the possibility of a mindful generation. That's the dream, generational transformation. So a quick little check, a pulse check on our schools and our communities. You think about our homes, so many of us have so much chronic stress. That's a reality right now. Of course, with COVID, things have exacerbated, but that's a reality of so many of our lives. And then so many of us are dealing with generational trauma passed down through our genes generationally, from parent to child to grandchild and so on. Look at our schools, and you've probably seen articles about teachers burning out. There's an equity piece here, where teachers who are serving underserved communities are burning out faster. And then you ask any teacher, and they'll often say that student emotion regulation is a massive challenge. If students are acting out because of the chronic stress in their lives, at school, at home, in the community, that makes teaching and learning extremely difficult. Look at the state of our health. We're talking about mental health crises among children and youth, plenty of articles getting written over the last few years. We're talking about our physical health and its implications with chronic stress. We know that stress affects our gene maps, turning on disease-causing genes, turning off health-producing genes. Stress accelerates aging. There are many, many dimensions, tentacles of chronic stress, toxic stress, traumatic stress, and post-traumatic stress. And then as you look at our work lives, a tremendous amount of inequity, or systemic racism. 9 out of 10 people who have been polled in large surveys say that they don't find meaning and purpose in their lives. What a travesty. And as you look at this, the places where we live and work and play, in our homes, our schools, our clinics, our workplaces, you find that the entire ecosystem of our communities is significantly impacted. So what are some of these impacts? As we're trying to explore, getting to root causes so we can find optimal solutions. Cutting-edge neuroscience is saying that when you have too much stress for too long, there are some very significant impacts on our brains that show up in our behaviors. I'm just listing 4 of these, 4 big ones. Just think for a moment about the implications of each of these 4 in your own life, in your work, in your relationships. Neuroscience is saying it's harder to focus, it's harder to pay attention. You immediately think, oh, that has something to do with learning readiness, right? Teachers saying that we shout at our students 100 times a day, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. But we often don't teach them how. But attention and focus are also the seed of creativity. They're also the essence of the difference between hearing and listening, seeing and perceiving. Focus and attention is about presence. And in our multitasking lives, how often are we fully present? Presence, as people have said, is an overt expression of love in action. If you have had one conversation with someone where you were fully present, you will remember it, and that other person also will remember it. Think about emotion regulation. Neuroscience is saying it's harder to self-regulate. People are saying that emotion regulation is perhaps the key skill that will help us navigate the next century. Why? Because emotion regulation is about choice. We're making choices all the time. And who is going to teach us to choose what is good for us in the long term than what merely feels pleasant in the short term? Who is going to teach us to act rather than merely react? That is the power of emotion regulation. It affects everything we do. What we eat, how much and when. What we read, what we watch, who we hang out with, what we discuss. All of these Let's look at the next. It's around coping. There are only two options here, right? You either cope in healthy ways or we cope in unhealthy ways. And neuroscience is saying that it's harder to cope in healthy ways when we're stressed out. And so it's not just the drugs, the alcohol, the obvious addictions, but we are in an addiction-infested culture, and we have to ask ourselves, what is my addiction? And how healthy is it? Is it social media? Is it shopping? Is it Netflix? What is it? And finally, empathy. The ability to look at the world through another's eyes, to place our feet in another's shoes or sandals. The essence of interconnectedness and interdependence. Then neuroscience is saying that it's harder to feel connected when you're stressed out. What does that mean? What is an individual without empathy for self? We're often so hard on ourselves. What is a relationship without empathy? What is a family without empathy? A classroom without empathy? A school without empathy? A neighborhood, a community without empathy? What is this world without empathy? Or we're merely destroying our fragile planet without a thought about future generations to come. And so as you start thinking about the implications, these profound and pervasive implications of chronic stress, start thinking, what is the solution? Neuroscience is pointing squarely at mindfulness, an ancient class of practices that have been around in every culture throughout history for thousands of years. Saying that mitigates all of these four impacts. Mindfulness helps us focus. It helps us self-regulate. It helps us cope in healthier ways. It helps us with empathy. Now, a little bit of very recent research that says something beyond just mindfulness, the practices that you just did, and mindfulness and movement. Why? This is executive function research. These higher order thinking capabilities that increase the likelihood of healthy life choices, enhance the quality of our lives, important for academic performance, and so much more. Things like selective attention, self-regulation, cognitive flexibility, appreciating multiple viewpoints, the ability to reason, all of these are considered EFs, executive functions. And so as Professor Adele Diamond and her team at the University of British Columbia did a major meta-study over several years, looking at different ways to develop executive functions, they came to this profound conclusion that mindful movement is by far the best to develop executive functions. There's computerized training, non-computerized training for cognitive training, whether it was neurofeedback, whether it was sports, music, art, literature, you name it. They looked at, executive function development, throughout the world, 197 or so papers and studies from around the world. Why is this so exciting for us? Because this shows a profound convergence. Neuroscience has been saying, yes, mindfulness, mindfulness, mindfulness helps. But the trauma research says movement, movement, because we hold our issues in our tissues. Our stress and trauma are squarely in our bodies. And so all of a sudden pointing at mindful movement, which is exactly what we've been doing in the community for 16 years and more. And now giving you a little sense of where we've been. This is not only published research that you can easily see in the public domain, where research has found substantial statistically significant impacts. But now, case studies that we also conduct in many of our schools. This is summary from 39 urban K-12 schools, with 4,500 students, 350 teachers. The numbers are getting large over these last couple of years, just before COVID hit. And just look at this and see how it jives with what we're seeing around executive function research. 88% of these students better at managing their emotions. 80% more focus, more attention, more engagement, 75% of these students, 3 out of 4, making better choices for themselves. So that's one dimension. The second dimension, what is it doing for these teachers? Teacher burnout was an issue in our schools. 85% have a better classroom climate. 90% are saying they're better at managing their own emotions. 87% are saying they're sustaining themselves better as educators. What is the power of that when you have teachers burning out like flies across the country, creating a national shortage? A tool that we've developed, not only a beautiful color-coded poster with so much diversity and inclusion built into it very thoughtfully, that allows us these emotion regulation shifts. How do I go from angry or anxious to releasing some of that destructive energy? How do I feel a little bit energized when I'm tired, when I'm nervous, when I'm scared? How do I feel a little boost of self-confidence, a bit of strengthening? How do I feel a little more relaxed when I'm stressed, focused when distracted? And so 4 little practices, 2-minute practices, just like we're doing, that allows for these mood shifts. Not only a color-coded poster that educators love, hundreds of them in schools, thousands of them, but also, especially with COVID, a little library of videos, 2-minute videos that we call the mood shifter. And now, as you'll see in a bit when Roz demonstrates the app, practice in the pocket.